The first time I realized my husband had truly abandoned me was when I stood on the front porch of our house in Austin, Texas, holding my 4-day-old daughter in one arm and a hospital discharge bag in the other. My key wouldn't work. I tried again, then again. The lock clicked, but it wouldn't turn. My heart started pounding. I looked down at little Emma sleeping peacefully against my chest. "Come on," I whispered. I tried the second key. Nothing. Then my phone buzzed. A text from my husband, Ryan. "Don't try again." I changed the locks. For a second, I couldn't breathe. I stared at the message, convinced I was hallucinating from exhaustion. 4 days earlier, I had given birth after 18 hours of labor. 4 days earlier, Ryan had held my hand in the delivery room. 4 days earlier, he had kissed my forehead and called us a family. Now I was standing outside my own home with a newborn baby, while my husband informed me by text that I wasn't allowed inside. Then another message appeared. "You need to stay somewhere else for a while." My knees almost gave out. I called him immediately. He answered on the second ring. "Ryan, what is this?" His voice sounded cold. "I think some space is best." Space. I looked around in disbelief. "I just had your daughter." "I know. You changed the locks." Silence. Then he sighed. "My mom thinks it's the right thing." The mention of his mother made my stomach twist. Of course. Everything somehow came back to Diane. For years, Diane had inserted herself into every part of our marriage. What color we painted the nursery, which doctor I used, what food I ate during pregnancy, how much weight I gained. Nothing was ever enough for her. And lately things had gotten worse. Much worse. "Ryan," I said carefully, "are you seriously listening to your mother right now?" "You don't understand."
No.
"Explain it to me." Another long pause. Then he said something that changed everything. "Mom thinks you've been hiding things from me." I blinked.
What?
"Financial things." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was insane. We weren't rich. We lived comfortably. I worked as a marketing consultant. Ryan worked in commercial real estate. There were no secret yachts. No hidden mansions. Nothing. What exactly does she think I'm hiding? You know what? Forget it. "Ryan, I'll call you later." Then he hung up. I stood frozen on the porch. My newborn daughter stirred slightly. A warm Texas breeze moved through the neighborhood. And suddenly I realized I had nowhere to go. At least nowhere nearby. My parents lived in North Carolina. Most of my friends worked during the day. I felt completely alone. Then my phone rang. It was my best friend, Megan. The moment she heard my voice, she knew something was wrong. "What happened?" I burst into tears. 30 minutes later, she pulled into the driveway. When she saw me sitting on the porch holding Emma, her face turned white. "Oh my God." I simply nodded. She helped me into her car. As we drove away, I looked back at the house. The house I had helped build. The house where I had imagined raising my daughter. The house I apparently wasn't welcome in anymore. And I had no idea that Ryan's decision would soon destroy his entire life. The truth was that our marriage hadn't always been like this. When I met Ryan 6 years earlier, he was charming, funny, and ambitious. We met at a charity fundraiser downtown. He made me laugh so hard I nearly spilled wine on myself. For months, everything felt easy, natural, safe. Even Diane seemed pleasant back then. But after the wedding, things slowly changed. Ryan became increasingly dependent on his mother's opinions. Every disagreement somehow involved Diane. Every decision required Diane's approval. If we argued, Ryan called her. If we discussed finances, he called her. If we talked about children, he called her. Sometimes I felt like I was married to both of them. When I became pregnant, Diane's behavior intensified. She suddenly acted as though Emma belonged to her. She criticized everything. My diet, my doctor, my work schedule, my birth plan. Ryan rarely defended me. Instead, he would say things like, "She's just trying to help."
Or,
"That's how she shows love." But it never felt like love. It felt like control. Then, during my 8th month of pregnancy, something strange happened. Diane began asking questions about my late grandfather. Specific questions. Questions she'd never asked before. Didn't he own property? Wasn't he successful? Didn't he leave something behind? At first I thought she was making conversation. Now I knew better. She was digging.
Searching.
Looking for information.
I just didn't know why.
3 days after Ryan locked me out, he finally called. I was staying at Megan's guest room. Emma was asleep beside me. Ryan sounded irritated.
Not guilty.
Not ashamed. Irritated. How long are you planning to stay there? I stared at the phone. Excuse me? At Megan's. You locked me out. Temporarily. That's not how locks work, Ryan. He ignored that. Mom thinks we should discuss finances before you come back. There it was again. Finances. The obsession. What finances? You know exactly what I'm talking about. No, I don't. His voice sharpened. The inheritance. My pulse stopped. Inheritance?
Only 3 people knew about that.
My grandfather. My attorney.
And me.
I had never hidden it. It simply wasn't relevant. The inheritance wasn't cash sitting in a bank account. It was something far more complicated. Something Ryan clearly didn't understand. And the fact that Diane knew about it terrified me. Who told you? I asked quietly. He hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. Someone had been snooping, digging through documents, looking for information that wasn't theirs. And for the first time, I realized the situation wasn't just cruel. It might actually be dangerous, because if Ryan and Diane thought they had discovered my secret, they had only uncovered a tiny piece of the truth. And the real truth was about to leave them both speechless. That night, after Ryan mentioned the inheritance, I barely slept. Emma woke every couple of hours to feed, but even when she was asleep, my mind wouldn't stop racing. How did Diane find out? And more importantly, how much did she know? The next morning, I called my attorney, David Harper. My grandfather had hired David years before he passed away, and after his death, David became the trustee overseeing several legal matters connected to the family estate. When I explained what was happening, there was a long silence on the other end. Then David spoke carefully. Claire, has anyone contacted me pretending to represent you? My stomach dropped. What? About 2 weeks ago, a woman called my office. My heart started pounding. A woman. She claimed she was helping you organize family financial records. I already knew who it was.
Diane.
Did you give her anything?
No.
Relief flooded through me. Absolutely not. But she was very persistent. I closed my eyes. The timing suddenly made sense. Diane had started asking questions during my pregnancy. Then she tried contacting my attorney. Now Ryan had locked me out of the house. This wasn't random. This was planned. What exactly do they think they're getting? David asked. I don't know. But deep down, I was beginning to suspect. My grandfather, Thomas Whitmore, had been a successful businessman in Arizona. Most people assumed he left behind a simple inheritance. A few investments, some savings. Nothing extraordinary. The truth was far more complicated. And Ryan had never shown any interest in it. Until now. That afternoon, Ryan showed up at Megan's house. Uninvited. I saw his truck pull into the driveway. Immediately, my anxiety spiked. Megan looked through the window. Do you want me to send him away? Part of me did. But another part wanted answers. I'll talk to him. I stepped outside while Megan stayed inside with Emma. Ryan looked tired, frustrated, but not remorseful. Not even close. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he finally said, You've made this into a bigger issue than it needs to be. I actually laughed. A short, disbelieving laugh. You locked your wife and newborn daughter out of their home. Our home. No, I said firmly. Apparently not.
His jaw tightened.
We need transparency. There it is again. What? The money. Ryan crossed his arms. If we're married, I deserve to know everything. Then maybe you should have asked instead of changing locks. His face reddened. I found documents. What documents? He hesitated. That hesitation was all the confirmation I needed. He had gone through my private files while I was in the hospital giving birth. The realization hit me like a punch. While I was recovering from labor, while I was holding our daughter, my husband had been searching through my paperwork, looking for money, looking for leverage, looking for something he believed I was hiding. The betrayal hurt more than the locked door. Much more. I can't believe you. Claire.
No.
I took a step back. You violated my trust. You lied. I never lied. Then why didn't you tell me about this state? I stared at him. Because it wasn't yours. The words came out sharper than I intended. Ryan's expression darkened instantly. There it is. There what is? You think you're better than me. I almost laughed again. This wasn't about pride. It wasn't about status. It wasn't about superiority. It was about boundaries. And Ryan no longer seemed capable of understanding the difference. That evening, David called again. This time, his tone was serious. Claire, I think you need to come into my office.
Why?
There's something you should see. The next morning, Megan drove me downtown. David's office occupied the top floor of an older building overlooking the city. When I arrived, he handed me a folder. Inside were copies of emails. Several of them. My pulse quickened. The sender's name appeared repeatedly. Diane Lawson, Ryan's mother. I scanned the messages. With every page, my disbelief grew. Diane wasn't just asking questions. She had been actively trying to access confidential information. In one email, she implied I was mentally unstable because of pregnancy hormones. In another, she suggested Ryan might need legal protection for me. Then I reached the final page, and my blood ran cold. Diane had written, "We're concerned Claire may attempt to conceal assets that should belong to her husband." I looked up. What is this? David leaned back. A paper trail. I couldn't believe what I was reading. Diane wasn't simply curious. She was building a narrative. A dangerous one. One that could potentially be used in court. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Then another realization hit me. If Diane was preparing for a legal fight, Ryan probably knew. Maybe he wasn't just following her advice. Maybe he was participating. That possibility hurt more than anything. Because despite everything, I still wanted to believe the man I married existed somewhere beneath all this manipulation. But every new discovery made that harder. 2 weeks later, everything exploded. I was feeding Emma when my phone rang. It was an unknown number. Normally, I wouldn't answer, but something told me to pick up. Hello? Mrs. Lawson? Yes. This is Detective Harris with the Austin Police Department. My entire body froze. Police? Why would the police be calling me? There has been a complaint filed involving financial misconduct. For a second, I couldn't process the words.
What?
The detective sounded professional.
Come.
We'd like to ask you some questions. My heart hammered against my ribs. Then he added, "Your husband and his mother have made several allegations." The room suddenly felt smaller, warmer, harder to breathe in. Allegations. Against me. I looked at Emma sleeping peacefully in my arms. And for the first time, genuine fear entered my heart. Ryan hadn't just locked me out. He hadn't just violated my privacy. He and Diane were actively trying to paint me as a criminal. And they had no idea what they were about to unleash. Because hidden inside my grandfather's estate was a truth neither of them had discovered. A truth powerful enough to destroy every lie they had built. And within days, that truth would change everything. I spent the entire night staring at the ceiling. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the detective's words again. Your husband and his mother have made several allegations. I looked over at Emma sleeping in her bassinet beside Megan's guest bed. Her tiny chest rose and fell peacefully, completely unaware that her parents' marriage was collapsing around her. For weeks earlier, my biggest concern had been preparing for labor. Now I was wondering whether my husband was trying to ruin my life. The next morning, I met Detective Harris at the police station. I was terrified, but David insisted I go. If you've done nothing wrong, he told me, the truth will protect you. Still, walking into that building felt surreal. I had never even received a speeding ticket. Now I was sitting across from a detective discussing accusations of financial fraud. Detective Harris was professional and surprisingly kind. He reviewed several documents. Then he looked at me. Mrs. Lawson, did you ever transfer money to offshore accounts?
No.
Did you conceal marital assets?
No.
Did you falsify financial disclosures?
No.
For nearly an hour, he asked questions. Finally, he closed the file. Then he sighed. What exactly is going on between you and your husband? I hesitated. Then I told him everything. The pregnancy, the controlling mother-in-law, the locked house, the inheritance, the emails, the accusations. When I finished, he sat quietly for several moments. Then he said something I will never forget. I don't think you're the person we should be investigating. For the first time in weeks, I felt a tiny flicker of hope. 3 days later, David called. His voice sounded urgent. Claire, get to my office. My stomach immediately tightened. What happened? We found something. 20 minutes later, I was sitting across from him. Several folders covered his conference table. David slid one toward me. Inside were property records, corporate filings, trust documents. I frowned. What am I looking at? David leaned forward. The reason your grandfather structured the estate the way he did. My pulse quickened. Most people assumed Grandpa Thomas left me money. Technically, that was true. But the money wasn't the real inheritance. The real inheritance was ownership. Years ago, Grandpa had quietly purchased commercial properties throughout Arizona, Nevada, and Texas. Over time, those properties were transferred into a family trust. The trust generated income through leases, office buildings, and industrial developments. The value had grown dramatically over the years, far beyond what anyone realized. Even I didn't know the full extent until after his death. David opened another folder. Current estimated value. I looked down. Then I froze. The number was staggering. Far larger than anything Ryan could have imagined. Far larger than anything Diane could have imagined. For several seconds, I couldn't speak. Then David added the part that truly mattered. The trust is protected. I looked up. What do you mean? It was established before your marriage. Relief flooded through me. David continued. The assets are legally separate property. A weight lifted from my chest. Ryan hadn't locked me out of my own fortune. He had locked himself out. That afternoon, another twist arrived. One I never saw coming. Detective Harris called again. This time his voice was different. More serious. We need to discuss your husband. My heart sank. What happened? We discovered discrepancies. What kind? A pause. Then, financial discrepancies. I felt cold. Very cold. Over the next hour, the detective explained what investigators had uncovered. Several loans, hidden debt, credit accounts, questionable transactions. Most were connected to Ryan's struggling real estate ventures. Suddenly, everything started making sense. The obsession with my inheritance, the panic, the accusations, the desperation. Ryan wasn't searching for the truth. He was searching for a bailout. And Diane had been helping him for months, maybe longer. I sat silently as the pieces clicked together. The timing, the snooping, the lock change, the false allegations. It wasn't about honesty. It was about money. They thought I was hiding a fortune, and they wanted access to it. That evening, Ryan called. For the first time, he sounded nervous. Can we talk? I almost didn't answer, but I wanted closure. We met at a small coffee shop downtown. When he walked in, he looked exhausted, older somehow, like the past few weeks had aged him years. Neither of us spoke immediately. Finally, he sat down. I made mistakes. I stared at him. Mistakes. Such a small word. A word people use when they forget an anniversary. Not when they throw their wife and newborn child out of the house. Not when they accuse someone of crimes. Not when they destroy a marriage. You think. His eyes dropped. My business is in trouble. There it was. The truth. At last. How much trouble? He hesitated, then told me. The amount was shocking. Far worse than I expected. Several investments had failed. Debt had piled up. Investors were demanding answers. Ryan rubbed his face. I panicked. And your solution was to lock me out? He looked ashamed. For the first time, actually ashamed. My mother thought. I immediately cut him off.
No.
His eyes lifted. You don't get to blame her. Silence. You made the choice. He looked down again. Because he knew I was right. A week later, I filed for divorce. It wasn't an emotional decision. It was a necessary one. Trust had been shattered. Some things cannot be rebuilt, no matter how badly you wish otherwise. Ryan didn't fight it. In fact, he seemed relieved, like he finally understood the damage he had caused. But Diane was furious. She called, texted, emailed. She blamed me for everything, until one final discovery ended all of it. Through the investigation, authorities uncovered evidence that Diane had knowingly submitted false information while attempting to support the allegations against me. Nothing criminal enough to send her to prison, but enough to completely destroy her credibility. The woman who spent years controlling everyone around her suddenly found that nobody trusted her anymore, not even her own son. And that was the beginning of her karma. The biggest consequences were still coming. The months that followed were some of the hardest of my life. Not because of the divorce, not because of the legal paperwork, and not even because of Ryan. They were difficult because I was learning how to be a mother while grieving the life I thought I had. Every morning, I woke up before sunrise to feed Emma. Every night, I collapsed into bed completely exhausted. There were moments when I felt overwhelmed, moments when I cried in the shower because it was the only place I could be alone for 5 minutes. Moments when I wondered how everything had fallen apart so quickly. But every time I looked at my daughter, I found a reason to keep going. She deserved a stable life. She deserved peace. And for the first time in years, I realized something important. I deserved those things too. The divorce process moved surprisingly fast. Ryan cooperated with most of the paperwork. There were no dramatic courtroom arguments, no ugly custody battles, no screaming matches. In many ways, that made everything even sadder, because it showed how completely defeated he had become. The confident man I married seemed gone, replaced by someone carrying the weight of his own choices. One afternoon, nearly 4 months after Emma was born, we met with our attorneys to finalize the last details. Ryan looked tired, not angry, not bitter, just tired. When the meeting ended, he asked if we could speak privately. I hesitated before agreeing. We walked outside into the warm Texas afternoon. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Ryan looked at me. I owe you an apology. I stayed silent. He swallowed hard. A real one. The sincerity in his voice surprised me. I betrayed you. I didn't respond. He continued. I let fear control me. His eyes filled with regret. I listened to people I shouldn't have listened to. I knew exactly who he meant, but this time he wasn't hiding behind excuses. I should have trusted my wife. The words hung between us. Months earlier, hearing them might have changed everything. Now, they simply felt late. Painfully late. I loved you, Ryan, I said quietly. His eyes closed. I know. I stood beside you. He nodded. I know. I would have helped you. His shoulders slumped. That seemed to hurt him most, because deep down he knew it was true. If he had simply told me the truth about his financial problems, I would have supported him. We could have faced it together. Instead, he chose suspicion, control, fear. And by the time he realized his mistake, there was nothing left to save. 6 months later, karma arrived in a way nobody expected. Ryan's business partner filed a civil lawsuit connected to several failed investments. The investigation into company finances became public. News spread quickly throughout the local real estate community. Clients disappeared. Investors walked away. Professional relationships collapsed. Ryan wasn't accused of crimes, but his reputation suffered tremendous damage. The same reputation he had spent years building. The same reputation he risked trying to gain access to money that was never his. Meanwhile, Diane experienced her own consequences. People who once listened to her stopped answering her calls. Family members learned about the false allegations she had helped spread. Old friendships faded. Her influence vanished. For someone who spent years controlling others, losing that control was devastating. The most surprising part? Ryan eventually distanced himself from her. Not completely. She was still his mother. But their relationship changed forever. Because once the truth came out, he could no longer pretend she wasn't part of the destruction. As for me, my life slowly began to heal. The trust continued generating income, but I treated it exactly as my grandfather intended. Not as a luxury, not as a weapon, but as a tool for security. A foundation. I purchased a beautiful home outside Austin with a large backyard for Emma. Nothing extravagant, just peaceful. The kind of place where children could run barefoot through the grass. The kind of place that felt safe. For the first time in years, nobody criticized my decisions. Nobody questioned every choice. Nobody tried to control my future. The silence felt strange at first, then wonderful. I started sleeping better, laughing more, breathing easier. I found a therapist who helped me process everything that had happened. Week by week, the anger began to fade. Not because Ryan deserved forgiveness, but because I deserved freedom. Holding on to bitterness only kept me connected to the worst chapter of my life. And I was ready to move forward. One rainy afternoon, almost a year after the divorce, I received an unexpected letter. It was from Ryan. Not an email, not a text message, a handwritten letter. I sat at my kitchen table while Emma colored pictures nearby. Then I opened it. The letter wasn't asking for reconciliation. It wasn't asking for money. It wasn't asking for anything. It was simply an apology. A genuine one. Several pages long. Ryan admitted his failures, his fears, his mistakes. He accepted responsibility.
Completely.
By the time I finished reading, tears had formed in my eyes. Not because I wanted him back. I didn't. But because accountability matters. Truth matters. And after everything, hearing him finally accept responsibility brought a sense of peace I hadn't expected. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. Then I moved on with my day. A few weeks later, Emma celebrated her first birthday. Friends and family filled the backyard. Children laughed. Music played softly. The smell of barbecue drifted through the air. My parents had flown in from North Carolina. Megan stood beside me helping organize gifts. At one point, I looked around and felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Gratitude. Not for the pain. Not for the betrayal. But for surviving it. For growing through it. For discovering my own strength. As the sun began setting, Emma stumbled across the grass on unsteady little legs. Everyone cheered. She laughed. A loud, joyful laugh. The kind only a happy child can make. I picked her up and held her close. For a moment, I remembered standing on that porch 1 year earlier, locked out, exhausted, heartbroken, terrified. I had believed my life was ending. In reality, it was beginning. Because losing the wrong people sometimes makes room for the right future. Ryan thought changing the locks would give him control. Instead, it cost him everything that truly mattered. And the inheritance he desperately wanted? It was never the most valuable thing I owned. The most valuable thing I owned was the strength to walk away from people who didn't value me. And that was something nobody could ever take away.